We're going to start off part 2 by filling in some basic CSS styling that we're going to use throughout the rest of our application. So this should be pretty quick. I'm just going to set up body. I'm going to give it a font family of Arial and a margin of 0. I'm going to set up our H1 tags, and they're going to have a green background, like so. They're going to have 20 pixels padding. We're going to have a slightly larger 1.2 M pixel size, or M size, excuse me. They're going to be white. And finally, we're going to have margin 0 top, 0 right, 20 pixels on the bottom, and 0 left. Okay. And then we're also going to have an ID called content. That's simply going to have a padding of top and bottom 0 and 20 pixels left and right. Okay. And then we're going to need a couple bits of styling for our forms and showing errors and alerts. So I'm going to include a class called required. And that's going to be red. It's going to have a font size of 0.8 M. It's going to have the clear both property and a padding top of 20 pixels. We're going to have an error class as well. We're going to float that to the left. It's going to be red as well. We're going to give it display block. Padding of 4 pixels top, 0 right, 0 bottom, and 10 pixels to the left. And finally a font size of 0.8 M. Okay, and then we're also going to have an alert. And we're going to give it a light yellow background. In my case, it's going to be like so. We're going to give it a 1 pixel solid yellow border, 8 pixels of padding all around, and a margin bottom of 20 pixels. And then finally for our form styling, so form, I'm just going to have overflow auto, and actually we don't need any padding on this. For our form labels, label, float left, clear both. I'm going to set a width of 160 pixels and display block. And on our inputs, I'm going to set a specific width of 220 pixels, padding of 2 pixels, margin bottom of 4 pixels, and finally float to the left. And last thing, we're going to include an input with a class of submit. This is for our submit buttons, and we're going to float those to the left. Add clear both, set at 80 pixels width, and finally a bit of margin top. Like so. Okay, so you can go ahead and save this, and like I said, this is just some basic styling that we'll use throughout the rest of the application just to make it look a little bit prettier. So the first thing we're going to do after this is let's go ahead and open up our login.php view, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste in some basic HTML content. So we're going to give this a title of login, and let's give it some basic styling by including our CSS. So I'm going to do that. I'll explain this in a minute but we need to put views styles.css, and that should be good. Now let me explain. The path can be a little bit tricky. Now you notice that our view file is actually within the views folder, but how we're going to be calling this is from login.php, we're going to use a PHP include to include this file. So therefore the path actually starts from out here. So we need to include the views folder. So you should be able to see this in action in a minute or two. Okay, so within the body, let's include an h1 tag. So login. Let's include a div with an ID of content. That's going to wrap all the elements on the page. And then we're going to create a form. Action we'll leave blank because it's going to redirect to the same page. And the method we'll set to post. Within this form we'll have a div. And I'm not going to explain that too much, but if you want to pass HTML validation, you need to include a div with some sort of block element within the form. So we're going to start out with a label. And this is going to be for username. Like so. And then below, we're going to have input. And it's going to be type text. We're going to call it username. And let's close this off. And then just after this, we're going to go down and we're going to include another label for a password this time. And these stars after the labels indicate that these fields are required. I'll explain that more in a second. So input, and this one we're going to be password. It's going to be named password. And then let's go down here. I'm going to include a paragraph tag with a class of required, and this just visually indicates to the user that these two fields are required. And then lastly on this page, go ahead and add an input with the type of submit. I'm going to call it submit, give it a class of submit, and finally a value, also submit. Okay, so that's the basics. Let's go back in here and add a couple additional things. There are two things that we want to do with this form. First of all, we want to be able to preserve form data. So for example, if the username enters in an incorrect username and password combination, we want to be able to redirect them back to this page and still have that username and password filled in, so they don't have to retype things if one of them is correct. So we're going to go ahead and do that by adding a value to both of our inputs, like so. So value, and we're going to echo out echo, and we're going to echo out input, and this is going to be user. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste, and we're going to do the exact same thing for password, except we're going to use the variable input and pass instead. Okay, so that takes care of preserving our values within that. We also want to display some sort of error message to the user, and we're going to go ahead and do that up here. So we're going to include PHP, and we're going to check if a variable is set. In this case, we're going to check for error. If the alert variable is set, for readability's sake, let me go down here. So echo, we're going to echo out a div with a class of alert. Like so. And then within this div, we want to display the contents of a variable. We're going to call that one, again, error. And we're going to call it like so. Okay, so we're going to be setting up the PHP which handles all this in a couple minutes. But so we've set up this variable so it checks. Actually, forgot one little bit. So we need to check if this variable holds a value. So if it doesn't equal a blank string, we're going to display this alert div and display the error that shows up. So that's the first part. And then lastly, we're going to want to add in a little bit of code to indicate to the user which input is incorrect. So I'm going to go ahead and add here div class. So that's going to be error. And within that, we're going to echo out some PHP. We're going to echo out a variable called error. We can actually just call this error user, like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this div, like so, and paste it here. In this case, we're going to be using pass instead. Okay, so that's it for our login.php view. And continue on to part 3, where I'll be discussing how to build the PHP logic that displays this.